Elliot Graves was an architect. 54 years old, 28 years of work. A firm he had built from a single drafting table in a rented room into something people in the industry actually recognized. He didn't keep trophies on his desk. He kept pencils. Specifically, one pencil, pale yellow, hexagonal, always tucked behind his right ear, a habit from his student days that had survived every meeting, every deadline, every milestone. The pencil was his. He reached for it without thinking the way other people reach for their phones. Every morning started the same way. Coffee, pencil, a sheet of blank drafting paper. Sometimes he'd sit for 20 minutes without drawing anything, just thinking, the pencil resting between his fingers. His staff learned early on not to interrupt those 20 minutes. The best designs came out of them. That was how life looked for a long time. Then, 18 months ago, Elliot fell down a short flight of stairs. Nothing dramatic. A missed step, a stumble. The kind of accident that happens to anyone. He got up, brushed off his jacket, and thought nothing of it. 2 weeks later, his hands started trembling. By month 3, he couldn't hold a pencil steady enough to draw a straight line. By month 6, he needed help standing up from his chair. The neurologists used words he didn't understand and gave him diagnoses that contradicted each other. Progressive, possibly degenerative, consistent with nerve damage from the fall, possibly not. Continue therapy, reduce stress, take these medications in the morning and these ones at night. His wife, Nadine, handled all of it. The appointments, the medications, the scheduling, the paperwork. She did it without complaint, without drama, with the kind of steady warmth that made every doctor, every nurse, every visitor comment on what a remarkable woman she was. She was remarkable. She was also doing something every morning before she brought his coffee in. But let's not get there yet. Let me show you something first. Okay, pause. I need you to look at a specific detail before this story goes any further. On the wall of Elliot's study, directly across from his desk, hung a framed architectural sketch. The very first drawing he'd ever sold. A small mixed-use building. Nothing grand, but it was the one that started everything. It was matted in dark linen, glass front, simple black frame. In the bottom right corner, in his own handwriting, a signature. About 4 months into his illness, Nadine had placed a small piece of paper over that corner. She said the afternoon light was hitting the glass at an angle that could cause the paper to fade. She didn't want the sketch to deteriorate. She was thoughtful like that. The paper stayed there. Elliot never mentioned it. He was too tired to mention things like that. But that small piece of paper, covering his signature on his first drawing, in his own house, in his own study. Hold on to that. Toby was 10 years old and had been living in this house for most of his life. His mother, Rosa Ferreira, had been the housekeeper here for 8 years, which meant Toby had grown up in the kitchen, in the back hallway, in the garden, in all the quiet spaces that a large house has between its official rooms. He knew which floorboards squeaked. He knew where the good light came in during morning. He knew which drawer in the kitchen had the extra measuring tape, and which one never fully closed. He was the kind of kid who noticed things. Tuesday morning, 6:47. Toby was clearing the breakfast setup when Nadine came into the kitchen carrying Elliot's coffee mug. She had already filled it downstairs. She set it on the counter, looked toward the hallway for a moment, then reached into the cabinet above the refrigerator where the cooking spices were kept. She took out a small jar, not a spice jar, a pill container, the kind with a white child-proof cap. She opened it, tapped a small amount of white powder into the coffee, stirred it twice with a teaspoon, rinsed the spoon immediately, and put the jar back. Then she picked up the mug, smiled to herself the way people smile when they're satisfied with something, and walked out. Toby stood at the sink with a dish in his hand and didn't move for several seconds. He had seen the whole thing. He didn't tell Nadine. He didn't tell his mother right away. He went back to clearing up and thought about it for the rest of the morning the way a 10-year-old thinks about something that doesn't quite fit into any category he has words for. After lunch, he found Rosa in the laundry room and told her what he'd seen. Rosa's hands stopped folding. She asked him to describe the jar. He described it. She asked what the powder looked like. He told her. She asked if he was sure. He said yes. Rosa stood in the laundry room holding a half-folded sheet and looked at the wall for a long time. Then she took out her phone and called her father. Ong Sven, which was what Rosa called her father and what Toby had always called him, was a retired pharmacist. He was 69 years old and lived 40 minutes away, and he had an opinion about everything, which he shared freely and without invitation. But when Rosa described what Toby had seen, he went quiet. That was unusual. Rosa noticed it. She described the jar again. He asked 2 questions. Short, specific questions. The kind someone asks when they already know the direction the answer is going in. Then there was silence. When he spoke again, his voice was careful in a way Rosa hadn't heard in a long time. He said, "Don't say anything yet, to anyone. Let me make a call first." She asked who he was calling. "Someone who can tell us what this actually is," he said. "Before we say something we can't take back." Rosa ended the call and stood in the laundry room with her phone in her hand and the half-folded sheet still in her arms. That afternoon, the feeling in that house shifted. Not visibly, not loudly. Just shifted. The way air shifts before a storm when nothing yet looks different from the outside. Toby found Elliot in the garden around 3 o'clock. He was in the wheelchair near the old stone bench, the one that sat at the far end of the yard where the garden path widened. It was a good spot in the afternoon. The light came in from the west at that hour, and the stone held warmth from the morning sun. Elliot sat there sometimes for an hour without doing anything, just looking at the garden he used to walk through every day before all of this. Toby came out and sat on the bench nearby. For a while, neither of them said anything. That was fine. They had a history of comfortable silences. Then Toby said, "Where did your pencil go?" Elliot looked at him, then at his right ear, where the pencil used to always be. "Drawer," he said. "I can't hold it properly anymore." Toby looked at Elliot's right hand resting on the wheelchair arm. He didn't say anything about that. Instead he said, "What does it feel like, not being able to draw?" Elliot thought about it. Like having something taken out of a room, and not being able to remember what used to be there. Toby nodded slowly, like that made sense to him. Then he said, "Can I see if you can stand up?" Elliot looked at him. "Why?" "I want to know something." Elliot almost said no. He came very close to saying no. The therapist had cleared him for supervised standing exercises twice a week, but he hadn't done one in 11 days, because doing them made him feel the distance between where he was and where he used to be, in a way that was harder to manage than just sitting still. He looked at Toby's face. 10 years old, no agenda in it. Just curious and certain in the way children are certain before the world teaches them to second-guess themselves. "All right," Elliot said. He placed his hands on the wheelchair arms and pushed. His forearms trembled. His legs shook badly, the way they always did now. He got 2 inches of clearance and dropped back into the chair. He breathed. Toby said nothing. He waited. Elliot tried again. This time he got up, stayed for 3 seconds, and sat back down. His heart was going faster than it should have been from that little exertion. "You did it," Toby said. "Barely," Toby shrugged. "Barely counts. Okay, I have to stop here for a second, because this is the part of the story that I keep coming back to. This 10-year-old kid sitting on a stone bench watching a man he's known his whole life struggle to stand up for 3 seconds, and the only thing he says is, 'Barely counts.' Not, 'You'll get better soon.' Not, 'I'm so sorry.' Not, 'Should I get your wife?' Barely counts. I don't know about you, but I needed someone to say that to me at some point in my life. And nobody did." That same evening, Owen Tate arrived. Owen was Elliot's lawyer, 61, grey at the temples, the kind of man who dressed well but didn't try to impress anyone with it. He had known Elliot for 16 years. He came through the back entrance that evening and met Elliot in the study with the curtains drawn. "Walk me through the last 6 months, Owen said. "Not the medical side. The paperwork." Elliot thought. There were some documents. Nadine said they were insurance forms, medical authorizations. "Did you read them?" A pause. "I was very sick in the mornings. She brought them when I was. I trusted that she explained them correctly." Owen set a folder on the desk. He opened it to a specific page and turned it toward Elliot. "This is not an insurance form," he said. "This is a power of attorney with a medical incapacity trigger. If two physicians certify that you are unable to manage your own affairs, this document gives Nadine full authority over your personal finances and your company's intellectual property portfolio." Elliot looked at the document. His signature was at the bottom. He recognized it. He did not recognize the rest of the page. "And the IP portfolio," he said slowly. "What's in it?" "Every architectural design you've filed under Graves Architecture in the last 22 years, plus the commercial properties attached to 3 of those projects." Owen turned another page. "They're being transferred, not all at once, small movements, through an intermediary company." He pointed at a name. "Do you know Sloan Holdings?" Elliot looked at the name. Garrett Sloan was Nadine's brother. The room went very quiet. Elliot placed both hands flat on the desk. He looked at the document. He looked at his signature. He looked at the framed sketch on the wall, with the small piece of paper covering his name in the corner. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "There's a project launch in 2 weeks," Owen said. "Your firm's biggest commission to date. Nadine has already arranged for Garrett to speak on the company's behalf at the event. If he presents at that launch while the IP transfers are still processing, the legal situation becomes significantly harder to reverse." 2 weeks. Elliot was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I need a doctor. Not the one she hired. My own." Owen nodded. "I know someone. Dr. Priya Anand arrived 2 days later through the service entrance at the back of the property, carrying a bag that looked more like a traveler's kit than a medical case. She was 50, precise in her movements, the kind of doctor who explains things without softening them. She examined Elliot for 40 minutes. She asked him to describe his symptoms in detail, when they started, how they progressed, which ones had worsened, and which had stayed the same. She took 2 small samples with equipment from her bag. She did not write anything down. When she was done, she sat across from him and looked at the surface of the desk for a moment before speaking. "This isn't nerve damage from a fall," she said. Elliot waited. "Neuromuscular depression, cumulative, low-dose chemical exposure over a sustained period. It mimics progressive neurological conditions very convincingly on standard testing because the symptoms are real. The mechanism isn't." She looked at him directly. "If the exposure stopped now, and you began movement therapy immediately, your prognosis for significant recovery is good. How long has this been happening?" She looked at the progression chart she'd made in her head from his description. "I'd estimate 12 to 14 months. 12 to 14 months. He had been married to Nadine for 2 years. He let that arithmetic sit in his chest without saying it out loud. He pressed his palms flat against his thighs and breathed slowly. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "Stop whatever you're ingesting that you haven't approved yourself. Start moving. Every day. More than feels comfortable. The muscles are not gone. They're suppressed. They'll come back if you ask them to." After she left through the service entrance, Elliot sat alone in the study for a long time. He looked at the framed sketch on the wall, the small piece of paper in the corner. He looked at his hands. Then he opened the desk drawer and took out the pale yellow pencil. He held it. His hand trembled. The pencil moved with it. He gripped it harder, not hard enough to hold it steady, but hard enough to feel that it was still there. He put it in his pocket. The next morning, Nadine came in at 7:12 with his coffee and her usual quiet warmth. She set the mug on the table beside his chair. She asked how he slept. He said fine. She said the physical therapist was coming Thursday, and wasn't that good? Something to look forward to. She adjusted the blanket over his legs. He watched her face while she did all of this. He had been watching this face for 2 years. He had trusted it. He had been grateful for it, genuinely, deeply grateful, in the way you're grateful for someone who stays when the staying costs something. Now he watched it and thought about 12 to 14 months. She handed him the coffee. He brought the mug to his lips. He felt the warmth against his mouth. He pretended to drink. He didn't swallow. She watched him, satisfied, the same way she always watched. He had noticed that before and chalked it up to caring about his routine. Now he understood it differently. When she left the room, he got up slowly from the wheelchair, moved to the bathroom, and spat the coffee into the sink. He stood there, looking at the drain. Real talk. Let me ask you something direct. Have you ever had to perform normalcy for someone who was hurting you? Have you ever had to smile and nod and say fine and pretend not to see what you were seeing because you needed more time? If you have, you know what Elliot was carrying that morning. You know exactly how heavy that gets. Leave a comment. Tell me your version of that moment. That afternoon, Elliot went to the garden. Rosa was near the back fence pruning the hedge. She didn't acknowledge him directly when he rolled out. She was working. But she worked very slowly for someone who usually moved efficiently, and she positioned herself facing away from the house windows. Toby came out 5 minutes later with a glass of water and a math book he wasn't reading. He sat on the stone bench. He put the math book beside him. "Yesterday you stood for 3 seconds, he said. "I know. Today we try 9. Elliot looked at him. "We? I have to count," Toby said simply. "Otherwise you might stop early." That was the beginning of what they did every afternoon for 2 weeks. Not physical therapy. Something more specific than that. Something that had a goal attached to it. A real goal with a real date, and a real room with 5 steps up to a stage. And someone standing at the top of those steps who was supposed to be Elliot Graves. He placed his hands on the wheelchair arms and stood. 9 seconds. Then 12. Then 14. Rosa never turned around to watch. She just stayed slow. Owen called 3 days later with news that changed the texture of everything. The financial investigator had traced the IP transfers fully. 22 design files, including every major project in Elliot's portfolio, were in various stages of being moved to Sloan Holdings. The movement was structured to complete automatically on the day of the project launch, contingent on Garrett Sloan delivering the keynote address on behalf of Graves Architecture. Owen explained it in careful, precise language. The plan, as best they could reconstruct it. Elliot becomes incapacitated. Nadine gains legal authority. Garrett delivers the keynote at the launch, representing the firm, establishing himself publicly as the company's decision-maker. The IP transfers complete the same day. The medical incapacity documentation, with 2 physicians' signatures that Owen suspected were being arranged, would arrive shortly after. At that point, Elliot's connection to his own work would be severed legally and practically in the same motion. "What's our play?" Elliot asked. "We document everything before the launch. We prepare the evidence, and then we let the launch happen, but differently than they planned." "Different how?" Owen was quiet for a moment. "You walk in," he said. "You present, not Garrett." Elliot looked at his legs. "That's 11 days from now," he said. "Yes," Owen said. "It is." After the call ended, Elliot sat in the study alone. He looked at the sketch on the wall, the small piece of paper in the corner. He reached into his pocket and took out the pencil. He turned it over in his fingers. His hand was still shaking, not as badly as it had been, but still shaking. He put the pencil back in his pocket. Then he called Toby. 11 days. That was what Elliot had. 11 afternoons in a garden. 11 mornings pretending to swallow something he'd already decided to stop swallowing. 11 evenings watching Nadine plan the launch of a project she intended to hand to her brother. He counted the days the way he used to count steps in a building design, methodically, with the understanding that every number had to mean something or the whole thing collapsed. Day 1, he stood for 17 seconds without the wheelchair behind him. Just the stone bench, his hands gripping the edge, his legs trembling like they were trying to remember a language they'd almost forgotten. Day 2, 22 seconds. Day 3, he tried to walk 5 steps without holding anything and went down on his right knee on the garden path. Rosa, still facing away near the hedge, didn't turn around. Toby watched him get back up without offering a hand, which was exactly right. "My father used to say that falling doesn't cost you anything," Toby said when Elliot was back upright. "Only staying down does." Elliot looked at him. "Your grandfather says that." "My grandfather tells my father things. My father tells me." Toby shrugged. "It's the same." On day 5, Garrett Sloan came to the house. He came on a Wednesday afternoon, ostensibly to check on Elliot, which he did by spending 11 minutes in Elliot's company and 43 minutes in a room down the hall with Nadine. Elliot could hear the low register of their voices through the wall. Not the words, just the tone, which was not the tone of a brother visiting his sick brother-in-law. Garrett was 51, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who moved through rooms as though he had already negotiated the space in advance. He had a way of looking at Elliot that reminded Elliot of how people look at furniture they're deciding whether to keep or sell. "You look better than I expected," Garrett said, which was the kind of sentence designed to suggest Elliot looked worse than expected. "I have my good days," Elliot said. "Nadine tells me you've been resting more. That's smart. The launch is coming up. She and I have been working to make sure it goes smoothly so you don't have to worry." "I appreciate that," Elliot said. Garrett nodded, satisfied, and left the room to find Nadine. Elliot sat alone for a moment and thought about what Owen had said. You walk in, you present. He put his hand in his pocket and wrapped his fingers around the pencil. Not yet, but close. On day 7, they practiced the steps. There was a set of 5 garden steps at the side of the house. Stone, slightly uneven, the kind that had been there longer than anyone could remember. Toby stood at the top. Elliot stood at the bottom. "When you go up," Toby said, "don't look at your feet." "Why not?" "Because your feet already know where they're going. You looking at them just makes you scared of what might happen." Elliot put his right foot on the first step, pushed up. The effort was larger than it had any right to be for a single step. His left leg shook badly as it followed. He stood on step 1, breathing slowly, both hands on the railing. Second step. His right knee threatened to give. It didn't. Third step. He stopped there and looked ahead at Toby standing at the top. Toby didn't say anything. He just waited. Fourth step. His leg buckled, and he grabbed the railing with both hands and stayed there, bent forward, not moving. "Rest," Toby said. "Not quit. Rest." Elliot breathed, counted, pushed himself upright. Fifth step. He stood at the top and looked back down at the garden path below. The wheelchair was parked near the bench, facing away. From up here, it looked smaller than it felt. "That's the stage," Toby said. "That's the stage," Elliot said quietly. He walked back down slowly, one step at a time, and sat in the garden chair near the bottom. His legs were burning. His shirt was damp at the back. He sat there catching his breath, while the afternoon light moved across the stones. "Can I ask you something?" Toby said, sitting on the step. "Sure. Why don't you just tell her?" "That you know." Elliot thought about that for a long moment. "Because if I tell her now," he said, "she and Garrett adjust. They move things faster. They get in front of it." He looked at the garden. "But if she doesn't know that I know, then the launch goes exactly as she planned. Except I'm the one who walks in." Toby considered this. "So you need her to think you're still losing?" "Yes." Toby nodded slowly. "My grandfather says sometimes the only way to stop someone's trap is to let them believe it's working until you're ready to walk out of it." Elliot looked at him. "Your grandfather sounds like someone who's been in a few traps. He says everyone has." Toby picked up a small stone from the step and turned it over in his hand. "He also says that the people who set traps always underestimate how long a person can wait when they have a reason to." Elliot was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What's your reason?" Toby set the stone down. "You gave my mum this job when she had nobody else. You never asked her to be anything except what she was." He looked at Elliot directly. "That's worth something." Elliot pressed his lips together. Didn't speak. The afternoon light moved. That was the share moment, not the speech, not the revelation. This, a 10-year-old kid on a garden step telling a grown man what he was worth, in the simplest possible language, when no one else was watching. The night before the launch, Nadine sat across from Elliot at the dining table and talked about the event with the easy confidence of someone who has rehearsed a plan so many times it has started to feel like memory. She told him the venue was beautiful. She told him the guest list was complete. She told him Garrett would represent the firm well, that he was prepared, that he understood the project and would do it justice. "You'll be in the front row," she said, "right where everyone can see you. It will be good for you to be there, to see it." He looked at her across the table. "To see it," he repeated. "People want to know you're still part of things, even if you can't be up there yourself." She reached across and put her hand over his. "You built this, Elliot. That doesn't go away just because things have changed." He looked at her hand on his. He thought about 12 to 14 months. He thought about the piece of paper over his signature. He thought about 22 design files in various stages of leaving. "You're right," he said. "It doesn't go away." She smiled. She squeezed his hand once and stood up to clear the dishes. He watched her walk to the kitchen. Then he reached into his pocket and took out the pencil. He set it on the table in front of him and looked at it for a long time. Tomorrow, the morning of the launch, Elliot woke at 5:47. He got up from the bed, without the wheelchair. He walked to the window. His legs held him. Not easily, not without effort, but they held. He stood there looking at the garden in the early light. The stone bench, the 5 garden steps at the side of the house, the path where he had fallen on his right knee 8 days ago and gotten back up. He showered without help for the first time in 6 months. He dressed. He put on the jacket he had worn to every significant professional event in the last decade. The dark charcoal one, because some habits are worth keeping. He put the pencil behind his right ear. Then he sat in the wheelchair and waited for the day to begin. Nadine came in at 7 with coffee. She looked at him and her expression did something complicated for just a fraction of a second, a kind of assessment disguised as warmth, and then she smiled. "Today's the day," she said. "It is," he said. He did not drink the coffee. The venue was a converted warehouse on the edge of the business district. High ceilings, exposed beams, the kind of space that made architectural drawings look exactly right on the walls. Elliot's project had been running as a series of large-format prints along the east wall since 9 in the morning, the kind of display that stops people mid-conversation and makes them stand closer. By 11, the room held 114 people. Partners, investors, journalists from 2 industry publications, former clients, current clients, people who had been watching Graves' architecture for years, and people who were meeting the firm for the first time. Garrett Sloan was at the front of the room near the stage, in a dark suit, talking to 2 board members with the comfortable authority of a man who believed he was about to take the podium. Rosa and Toby were near the back, standing against the east wall next to one of the large-format prints. Rosa was in her good coat. Toby had his hands in his pockets. Owen Tate was seated in the 3rd row on the aisle side, a laptop bag at his feet. Nadine pushed Elliot's wheelchair to a position at the far left of the front row, exactly where she had described. A clear sightline to the stage, a good angle for the cameras, a beautiful, tragic image. The founder watching his work, presented by someone else. She leaned down and touched his shoulder. "Ready?" she said softly. He looked at the stage. 5 steps. Center aisle. The podium at the top. "Almost," he said. The room settled. The MC stepped to the microphone and began the introduction. The usual words. Legacy. Vision. Defining project. And then, to present on behalf of Graves Architecture, we welcome Garrett Sloan. Garrett began to move from the front row toward the stage. Elliot placed his hands on the arms of the wheelchair. He pushed down. He stood up. Not perfectly, not without effort, but he stood, and the standing was real. And the room noticed it, the way rooms notice the unexpected. A quick intake of collective breath. Heads turning, a chair scraping somewhere in the middle rows. Garrett stopped walking. Nadine's hand moved toward Elliot's arm. He stepped away from it. 1 step. His right leg shook. He took the step anyway. Then he walked. He walked slowly down the center aisle toward the stage. His legs trembled with every step. He was counting, not the steps. He had stopped counting steps 2 days ago. He was counting breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way Toby had told him to on the garden stairs. Don't look at your feet. Look forward. He reached the bottom of the stage steps. The room had gone completely silent. Not the polite silence of an event respecting a speaker. The real silence. The kind that happens when everyone in a room simultaneously understands that something significant is occurring and no one wants to be the one who interrupted it. He put his right foot on the first step. 1. His leg shook but held. 2, 3. He gripped nothing. There was no railing on this side. He had looked at the plans for this venue 3 times in the last 4 days, and he had known there was no railing on this side. He had practiced without one. 4. His left knee buckled on the 4th step, and for 1 full second, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. He put his weight forward, found his balance, and held. 5. He stood on the stage. He looked out at the room. 114 people looking back at him. Some of them had known him for 20 years. Some of them were meeting him for the first time. All of them had, until 60 seconds ago, believed they were watching the end of something. He reached into his pocket and took out the pencil. He set it on the podium. Then he spoke. His voice was steady. It surprised him how steady. "This project," he said, "took 4 years. The design went through 11 revisions. 3 of them were my fault. I'll own that." A small sound in the room. Something between laughter and relief. "I've been told I won't be speaking today. That someone else would be better positioned to represent the work." He looked toward Garrett, who had not moved. "But this is my work, and I'd like to talk about it myself." He talked about the project for 7 minutes. He knew every detail of it, every calculation, every decision, every revision. He had designed it with his hands, with the yellow pencil on the podium, with 3 in the morning coffee and 12 arguments with contractors, and 1 structural engineer who told him the central beam couldn't do what he was asking it to do and who was wrong. When he finished, he looked at Owen. Owen opened the laptop bag. "Before we continue," Elliot said, "I need to show this room something. It concerns the firm, and it concerns everyone in this room who has a relationship with it." A large screen descended from the ceiling behind him. Owen connected his laptop. The first image appeared. Kitchen footage. Clear. Undeniable. Nadine at the counter, the small jar, the white powder into the coffee mug, the quick stir, the jar back in the cabinet. The sound in the room was something between a gasp and nothing at all. The second image. The IP transfer documents. 22 design files. Sloan Holdings as the receiving entity. A completion date of today. The third image. The medical power of attorney. Elliot's signature. The incapacity trigger clause. And beside it, the original document Elliot had been told was an insurance form, photographed side by side so the difference was immediately visible to anyone who looked. "I have spent 18 months believing I was losing my ability to stand," Elliot said. "I was not. Someone was making sure I couldn't. And someone was making sure that by the time I understood what was happening, there would be nothing left to stand up for." He looked at Nadine in the front row. She was completely still. Her hands were in her lap. Her face had not broken into anything visible, which somehow made it worse. She was still processing the distance between the plan she had arrived with and the room she was now in. "The legal situation will be addressed separately," Elliot continued. "My attorney, Mr. Tate, is prepared to speak with anyone in this room who needs clarification on what this means for any agreements associated with the firm." He looked at Garrett near the far aisle. Garrett had started to move toward the exit. 2 men in dark jackets who had been standing near the door stepped into the aisle. Garrett stopped. Owen was already on his feet with a folder. Elliot turned back to the room. "I built this firm because I believe that a building should outlast the argument that created it," he said. "That the design should be stronger than the designer's bad day. That what you put your name on should be worth putting your name on." He picked up the pencil from the podium. "Everything in this room with my name on it is still mine, and I intend to keep it that way." He looked out at 114 people and let the room hold that for a moment. Then he stepped back from the podium. He walked to the stairs, 5 steps down, 1 at a time. His legs were burning badly now, badly enough that he was aware of every muscle in both thighs with every downward step. He kept his back straight. He kept his eyes forward. At the bottom, he turned and looked to the back of the room. Rosa was standing against the east wall with her hand pressed to her mouth. Toby was next to her, hands still in his pockets, watching Elliot with the expression of a person who has been waiting for something to happen and is watching it happen exactly as expected. Elliot caught Toby's eye. He nodded. Small. Just one nod. Toby nodded back. That was the whole exchange. That was enough. What came after moved quickly, and without the drama of the event itself, which is how consequences usually work when the foundation is solid. Nadine and Garrett were escorted from the venue separately. The legal proceedings that followed were Owen's territory, and Owen handled them with the precision of someone who had been building toward this for 2 weeks. The IP transfers were reversed. The medical power of attorney was voided. The 2 physicians whose signatures had been arranged for the incapacity documentation withdrew. Separately, within 48 hours, once it became clear that the documentation's purpose was part of a larger pattern of fraud. The chemical compound that Dr. Priya Anand had identified was consistent with a known prescription medication being administered at non-prescription doses over an extended period. The legal language for what that constituted was something the investigators and attorneys worked through over the following months. Elliot did not involve himself in that process more than was required. What he involved himself in was the recovery. Movement, every day, more than felt comfortable. The muscles came back slowly, the way things come back when they've been suppressed rather than destroyed. Elliot understood now that there was a difference, and that understanding made the difference between treating the recovery as grief and treating it as work. He chose work. 6 weeks after the launch, on a morning that was cool and bright, Elliot walked the length of the garden path without assistance. Not quickly, not fluidly, but without stopping, without the wheelchair, without anything to hold on to except the air. Toby was beside him, not matching his pace exactly, but close enough to be there. The yellow pencil was behind Elliot's right ear. His hand was steady enough now to hold it there without thinking about it, which was the first time in 18 months that sentence had been true. At the end of the path, Elliot stopped and looked back at the house. He thought about the small piece of paper on the framed sketch in his study. He had taken it off the morning after the launch. What was underneath was exactly what it had always been. His handwriting, his signature, his first drawing. "You're walking," Toby said. "Working on it," Elliot said. "My grandfather says there's no difference." Elliot looked at him. "Walking is work," Toby said. "Work is walking. You're always moving towards something, even when you're just going to the end of the path and back." Elliot stood in the garden and thought about that. Then he turned and walked back the way he came. One step, then another, the way all things go that are worth doing. "Here's what I want to leave you with." Elliot didn't almost lose his company. He almost lost the right to exist as himself inside his own life. Those are different things, and it's worth being clear about the difference. The company, the designs, the IP, all of it could have been rebuilt. People rebuild things. That's something humans are genuinely good at. But what Nadine and Garrett were building toward was not just financial control. It was the complete substitution of Elliot's presence with Elliot's absence. A man who was physically there but legally, professionally, personally erased. A wheelchair in the front row at a launch where his name wasn't on anything anymore. That's not a theft, that's an erasure. And the only thing that stopped it was a 10-year-old kid who noticed something no one else was paying attention to. A retired pharmacist who asked 2 questions and went quiet. A lawyer who trusted his client enough to say the uncomfortable thing. A doctor who came through the back door. And a man who decided that barely counts was enough to start with. Size. Real talk. We talk a lot about big betrayals, the dramatic ones. The ones with obvious villains and clear moments. But the kind of damage that was done to Elliot happened in increments. A small piece of paper over a signature. A jar in a cabinet. A form slipped into a stack of others. One decision handed over, then another, until the whole thing was gone. Pay attention to the increments. Pay attention to who benefits from your confusion, your exhaustion, your inability to question. Pay attention to the small papers placed over your name. And if you know someone right now who is losing something slowly, something they don't have the language for yet, share this with them, not because it has easy answers, but because sometimes people need to know that barely counts, that 3 seconds counts, that 5 steps counts, that standing up at all, in whatever room you're in, counts as something. Leave a comment. Tell me about a moment where you had to perform normalcy while something was being taken from you. Or tell me about the person who helped you stand back up when you thought you couldn't. I'll read everyone. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And remember this. What you built with your own hands is still yours. until you stop being the one who shows up to claim it.